The shocking news reverberated through the tight-knit world of gold mining and reality television fans alike. Parker Schnabel, the golden boy of Discovery Channel's Gold Rush, had been sentenced to life imprisonment. For years, viewers had watched the young miner mature on screen, transforming from a teenager under his grandfather John Schnabel's wing into a driven, ambitious leader of his own mining operation. Few could have predicted that his story would take such a drastic and devastating turn, one that would leave both his supporters and critics stunned. The courtroom was packed with journalists, supporters, and family members as the sentence was handed down, life behind bars with no possibility of parole. The crime, the circumstances, and the unraveling of a once-celebrated figure would all combine to form one of the most sensational scandals in recent television history. Parker's descent into legal chaos began far from the goldfields of the Yukon. While his public persona remained largely intact on camera, those close to the operation had long whispered about Parker's increasingly volatile temperament. The pressure to maintain high gold yields, the strain of constant production schedules, and the weight of leading a crew through brutal working conditions were taking their toll. Insiders later reported that Parker had grown more reclusive, more irritable, and occasionally explosive. His well-documented breakups and rifts with crew members only hinted at deeper issues. But no one could have imagined just how serious those problems would become. According to official court documents, the case that brought Parker down centered on a violent incident that occurred late one night at a mining site in British Columbia. Parker and his crew had been pushing through a difficult season, with declining gold returns and mounting equipment failures. Stress levels were through the roof. Then, during an after-hours dispute over operational costs and alleged sabotage of machinery, a confrontation erupted between Parker and a recently hired crew member, whose name is being withheld due to privacy laws. Witnesses testified that the argument quickly escalated into a physical altercation. What began as shouting turned into shoving, and then, fatally, violence. The victim was discovered the next morning with severe blunt force trauma. Though initial reports suggested an accident, further forensic investigation indicated foul play. When police arrived at the scene, Parker was cooperative but visibly shaken. He claimed no knowledge of what had happened after the argument and said he had returned to his cabin shortly afterward. However, inconsistencies in his timeline, coupled with DNA evidence and witness testimonies, painted a far grimmer picture. One witness, a longtime mechanic on Parker's crew, stated that he saw Parker following the victim into the equipment shed shortly after the argument. Another described hearing yelling and a loud crash that night. The most damning piece of evidence came in the form of surveillance footage from a nearby ATV camera, which, although grainy, appeared to show Parker and the victim engaged in a scuffle before the victim fell limp to the ground. The arrest was made quietly, with authorities mindful of the show's large fan base and the media frenzy that would undoubtedly follow. For weeks, Discovery Channel made no comment, reportedly scrambling behind the scenes to understand the legal implications and future of Gold Rush. Parker was booked and charged with second-degree murder, a charge that was later upgraded to first-degree after prosecutors claimed they had uncovered evidence of premeditation. Emails and text messages recovered from Parker's phone hinted at growing animosity toward the victim, including statements that were interpreted as threats. The trial began several months later in a highly publicized proceeding that saw fans camped outside the courthouse and news outlets broadcasting daily summaries of testimony. Parker, usually confident and composed on screen, appeared gaunt and withdrawn, often whispering to his lawyers and refusing to meet the eyes of the press. The prosecution laid out a case that stunned even longtime fans. According to them, Parker had grown increasingly paranoid about crew loyalty and had accused the victim of sabotage without evidence. The friction had been building for weeks, and on the night in question, Parker allegedly confronted the man with the intent to intimidate him. But things went horribly wrong. The defense tried to argue that Parker had simply acted in self-defense, that the victim had lunged at him during a heated exchange, and that Parker had only struck out to protect himself. They brought in psychologists who testified that Parker was under immense psychological strain, bordering on a breakdown, and that his actions that night reflected impaired judgment rather than malicious intent. The court, however, was unmoved. The forensic evidence, particularly the autopsy report which indicated multiple blows delivered with a heavy mining tool, contradicted the idea of a spontaneous act of defense. The verdict was unanimous. The jury found Parker Schnabel guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the judge delivered the final ruling, there was an audible gasp in the courtroom. Parker sat silently, his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. Behind him, his mother wept uncontrollably, supported by other family members who had stood by him through the trial. The man who had once symbolized grit, determination, and youthful ambition had now become a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fame and pressure can twist even the most promising path. Back at the mining site, operations were immediately halted. The Discovery Channel issued a brief statement expressing condolences to the victim's family and confirming the indefinite suspension of Parker's gold rush operations. Several crew members gave emotional interviews in the days that followed, some defending Parker and others expressing relief that justice had been served. One longtime worker described a toxic culture that had developed around the mine, with long hours, high stress, and a lack of oversight contributing to increasingly dangerous working conditions. It was only a matter of time before something like this happened, he said. Meanwhile, the fallout for the Gold Rush franchise was immediate and severe. Ratings plummeted as viewers expressed outrage, disbelief, and sorrow. Online forums were flooded with speculation, with some die-hard fans refusing to believe the verdict, suggesting a setup or conspiracy. Others shared personal stories of how Parker had inspired them, expressing heartbreak over his dramatic fall from grace. Discovery faced calls to reevaluate their reality programming standards, with critics arguing that the network had failed to adequately monitor the psychological well-being of cast members working in extreme conditions. In the weeks following the sentencing, Parker was transferred to a maximum security facility in northern Canada, far from the rugged terrain he once dominated. His legal team filed an appeal, citing procedural errors during the trial and presenting new psychological evaluations that claimed Parker suffered from undiagnosed PTSD. But experts say the chances of the conviction being overturned are slim. With the public spotlight still on the case, any new legal developments would be subject to intense scrutiny. Legal analysts pointed out that the judge's careful handling of the case and the strength of the evidence made it unlikely that an appeal would succeed. Inside prison, Parker reportedly keeps to himself, rarely speaking with other inmates and avoiding contact with staff whenever possible. Former colleagues who have visited him describe a man broken by regret, tormented by the knowledge that one fatal moment has destroyed not just his life, but the legacy of his family. In one leaked letter to a friend, Parker wrote that he often dreams of his grandfather, John Schnabel, and wakes up wishing he could go back in time. "I let him down," the letter read. "I let everyone down." Yet not all are ready to abandon Parker completely. A grassroots movement led by fans and some members of the mining community has emerged in support of him, calling themselves Justice for Parker. The group argues that the sentence was too harsh and that the court failed to consider mitigating circumstances. They've launched petitions, organized awareness campaigns, and even crowdfunded for his legal fees. While their efforts have drawn attention, they've also faced backlash from the victim's family, who say the focus should be on the life that was lost, not the celebrity who caused it. The tragedy has sparked broader conversations about mental health in high-pressure professions. Psychologists and media watchdogs have called for more robust support systems for reality television participants, particularly those working in remote and extreme environments. "These are not actors playing roles," said one industry critic. "These are real people dealing with real stress, and when the cameras stop rolling, the problems don't disappear." Discussions are also underway within the Canadian mining industry about introducing stricter safety and conflict resolution protocols, ensuring that crews have access to counselors and mechanisms for reporting toxic behavior. As for Gold Rush, the future remains uncertain. Some have suggested the show might continue by focusing on other miners or new operations, but the shadow of Parker's downfall looms large. He was the face of the show for over a decade, and his story was central to its narrative arc. Rebuilding audience trust may prove difficult. Executives have remained largely silent, though anonymous sources say internal discussions are ongoing about how to responsibly address the situation in upcoming programming. For many, Parker Schnabel's story is a modern tragedy, a tale of ambition turned sour, of pressure cracking a once promising future. His rise to fame had been meteoric, driven by a mix of grit, inherited wisdom, and youthful hunger. His grandfather John had mentored him with pride, believing Parker would carry on the Schnabel name with honor. In many ways he did, but something went wrong along the way. Whether it was the pressures of leadership, the isolating nature of fame, or a personality ill-suited for sustained scrutiny, the result was the same. A young man full of promise now spends his days behind bars, far removed from the roaring machines and muddy gold pans of his youth. In the end, the story of Parker Schnabel has become more than a crime drama. It is a sobering reflection of how even those we idolize can falter, how success can carry unseen burdens, and how one irreversible act can undo years of hard work and hope. While the public moves on, drawn to the next sensational headline, those who knew Parker best continue to wrestle with the loss, not just of a television star, but of a man who once believed he could dig his way to greatness.